Okay. So I just put this up for anybody that might be interested. This was taken in 1978 when I was working on the Samadhi with an assistant by the name of Bhivu Jyoti. So you can see me standing here and Bhivu Jyoti standing here. And this was when we were just starting to build the actual Krishna Balaram Mandir Samadhi Museum and the Samadhi and the museum. All right, so let's start the program here. Okay. Tonight's topic is the knowledge acquiring process of the conditioned soul. And we're going to show you right here. Whoops, let's go back to where we were here. I had it, and then it just went away. Okay, so we're going to start right here. This is our situation. You get a handout? I can't really help you there. Now, I do understand these devotees appear to be filming it, and I was told that the presentation we did last night is now available on YouTube. So, and thank you for providing that service, because I don't think any of these presentations that I've been making have been videotaped as of yet. So, the temple is providing a nice service by videotaping it. Okay. Okay, so the topic tonight is the knowledge acquiring process of the conditioned soul. And we're going to start right here in the heart. The soul is the highest of all. And we can see here, we have the Paramatma and we have the Jivatma. And they are embedded in this very, very complex situation called the material world. And what is that situation? We see that there are many layers of difficulties coming on. And there is a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 42, that says, the working senses are superior to dull matter. And mind is higher than the senses. And intelligence is higher than the mind. But the soul, is actually the highest of all. And yet the soul is embedded in all of these difficult, problematic conditions. Even though the soul is Sat Chit Ananda, Vigraha, he has an eternal nature, full of knowledge, bliss, and form. And I like to point out here that many times we hear this term Sat Chit Ananda, which actually comes from the Brahma Samhita, but frequently people do not include the Vigraha. Particularly in the Western world, you hear Sat Chit Ananda. Many of the impersonalists have some concept of this Sat Chit Ananda, but they don't include Vigraha. And I think the reason why they do that is because many of the impersonalists tend to negate the spiritual form, or they don't know much about it, so they just sort of leave it off. But we know the soul has a form, it's a spiritual form, and therefore we say Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha. And yet, still, we are covered by so many false concepts, such as the ego, Anandamaya, identifying as bliss, Vijnanamaya, identifying as intelligence. We can get caught up in identifying ourselves as these different kinds of concepts. Manomaya, identifying as the mind. A lot of the scientists fall into this trap right here. they think we're the mind. They do all sorts of experiments on the mind to try to figure out where is consciousness coming from. Or Jnanamaya, the Jnana yogis identify as knowledge. They think the highest truth is just knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. But knowledge without Krishna is just useless. And then, of course, many people are subject to the senses, pranamaya, identifying as the life form breathing. They just think they're the body. They think that everything that is related to the body is them. Therefore, they buy all sorts of products to make the body look better, to have it different shapes, to have a tan, to have eyelashes. So there's so many things people are doing now. There's a huge industry in cosmetics, people identifying as the body. And then Anamaya is identifying based on food and gross body. They're somewhat tied together. Again, there's a huge industry of selling food. You know, buy this food, eat this food, you'll feel good. So this is the kind of stuff we're having to break through to actually be able to get back to the soul, which is captured or surrounded by all this stuff. And then again, if we pull out a little bit further here, we'll see that that's all immediately happening, but then there's also the world itself in the form of the 5 elements. You can see them illustrated here as earth, water, fire, air, ether. And then you have these other concepts: materialism, ignorance, false egoism, attachments, and envy. All of these things are competing for our attention. Earth, water, fire, air, and ether. It becomes freed from the 5 material attachments: ignorance, false ego. So these are the verses that I'm using to illustrate this aspect of the chart. And I think we all have very familiar with the concept of the wheel of samsara, which I'm showing here, is the wheel of samsara. We're going around and around and around and around so many times, being born into some body, into some place at some particular time, in some particular universe, under so many different kinds of conditions. And then eventually, just as you can see, I'm a little bit ill right now, disease is coming. And then with the disease, old age. They kind of come together. Old age and disease seem to come along. Eventually, no matter how healthy we may be as a young person, eventually old age and disease start impacting our ability to survive. And eventually the body falls ill into the form of death. In which case we understand that as the embodied soul continues through boyhood, youth to old age, the soul similarly changes into another body at the passing of this one. So this is our situation. It's a very difficult situation. And the question of life is how to resolve this situation. If we can acknowledge that this is happening and we realize it's not a very pleasant situation, especially when we start getting older and the body starts malfunctioning, it is certainly not a pleasant situation. And the hospitals are filled with people that will tell you this is not fun. And Prabhupada said that anybody who can observe this situation of birth, death, disease, and old age, what to speak of adhyatmic, adhidaivic, and adhibhotic miseries, and you don't realize that this is a problem, then that person is a madman. He's completely crazy. It is a problem. Of course, in the Western world, a lot of people try to deny it, but if you observe, you can see there's a problem. So the question is, how can we get out of this situation? And there's only so many ways that we can know. So if we go over to this part of the illustration, over here, let me zoom in a little bit more here so we don't get distracted. We have, let me start at the bottom. What we have here is what most people do. Now in India, there's a little bit more of an appreciation for scriptures and the science of the Vedas, but in the Western world, many people, they're really based on their senses. It's called pratyaksha. I want to see it, I want to measure it, I want to put it under a microscope, I want to analyze its qualities, and if I can't do that, then it doesn't exist. I'm not interested. So this is based on this Laukitka Sadharana, which is it's basically vision by sense perception, vision by our eyes, smell by our nose, auditory by our ears, tactile, touch. We want to touch it, feel it, smell it, taste it, and then ultimately our mind to try to understand it. But our senses are very limited in scope. So over here you'll see there are 4 imperfections. Prabhupada speaks about this all the time. You have imperfect senses. In this case, we're talking about our senses. So I have here, if you have perfect senses, then why do we sometimes need glasses? Or sometimes people need ear, what do you call it, to help them hear. Or I'm showing here a stethoscope so the doctor can hear your heart. So our senses, we all know our senses are very limited and they're imperfect. So we make tools to try to neutralize that imperfection, but still, there's some problem there. So there's other aspects here, extraordinary sense perception, which are perceived generally from a particular object. Example, recognizing a baked products because you know what bread is. So if you know what bread is and you see bread, you can say, oh, that's bread, if you've been exposed to it. And here's the Sanskrit words, jnana lakshana, sense organs perceiving qualities not attributed to it. Example, assuming bread is sweet because it appears to have a sugar glaze. So we can make that a deduction, but that doesn't necessarily mean because it has a sugar glaze that it might be sweet. Somebody might have put salt on that glaze and it's not going to be sweet at all. So I'm trying to give some examples of how our senses are only limited. Or you can't rely on the senses. Something might look like one thing, but it is not. So here we have the 8 yoga siddhi processes that the yogis can, learn to develop. Anima siddhi, becoming so small that he entered the atom. Lagima siddhi, becoming so light he can walk on water. Prapti siddhi, obtaining anything he wishes from anywhere in the universe. He can just stick his hand and take it. Mahima siddhi, becoming so heavy nothing can move him. I believe there was a pastime when Hanuman did this, when he first met Lord Ram, and they couldn't even move his tail. So there's different mystic potencies that are here. Ashitva siddhi, create or destroy whatever he wishes at will. Vashishtva siddhi is manipulate elements and natural laws. Prakamya siddhi, which is control the senses and never become frustrated. And then Kama Vashistya siddhi, assume any shape he wishes. So yogis may spend a lot of time perfecting these different forms of mystic powers, but they're all occurring within this material world, and it's not going to really give them any advantage. It's not going to ultimately solve any of the problems that we are observing over here on this samsara. So none of that's really going to help us. So then we go down a little further and we say effectiveness of perception. And then I'm saying senses can be very misleading. So again, if we look here and you look at this elephant and I ask you, how many feet does he have? You can see something, you know it's an elephant, but if you're actually having to count how many feet he has, it gets a little confusing because your senses are not so dependable. In this case, we are falling victim of an illusion. Of course, it's the illusion of the way this elephant is drawn, but still, there are so many illusions, and when we go to the magicians, sometimes we see magic acts. We're fascinated because they're showing us they're cutting somebody in half, and we know that can't possibly be happening, and yet it appears to be happening. And so that's how they take advantage of our fact that we are illusion prone. So, again, the whole point here is that if we're relying on our senses alone to try to understand something, is maybe not such a good idea. So indeterminate knowledge, nirvikalpya jnana, incomplete, faulty knowledge regarding a perceived event. So again, if we go back to the bread example, seeing bread and not knowing it if it's sweet, cheesy, or spicy. Just because you see a loaf of bread, you might have had a nice loaf of bread in the morning, and you might see something that looks exactly the same, and I'm sure we've all had this experience, especially with food. Sometimes we think something's one thing, or maybe you see a piece of fruit and it looks ripe, and then you taste it and it's not sweet, it's sour. So we've all had these experiences showing how our senses, particularly our eyes, can be very deceiving. So determinate knowledge is savikalpya vijnana. One understands fully the nature, dharma of what one perceives. So again, using the donut or the bread example, biting into a donut and discovering that it has jelly filled. You won't know that until you actually bite into it. So in this case, your sense of your tongue and taste will tell you, oh, this isn't just a piece of flatbread, but it's actually a sweet-filled donut. So I have a quote down here. Let's see if I can get this up. And I don't know how well you can see it, but I'll read it for you. The absolute truth, transcendence, is never subject to the understanding of imperfect sensory endeavor, nor is he subject to direct experience. He is the master of varieties of energies, like the full material energy, and no one can understand his plans or actions. Therefore, it should be concluded that although he is the original cause of all causes, no one can know him by mental speculation, and there's the reference to the Bhagavatam. My dear Uddhava, the unalloyed devotional service rendered to me by my devotees brings me under their control. I cannot be thus controlled by those engaging in mystic yoga, which we went over here. Sankhya philosophy, pious works, Vedic study, austerities, or renunciation. And there's a couple references, both from the Bhagavatam and the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila. So we know Krishna is known as a Kinchana. He cannot be figured out by your mind. So unfortunately, it seems that nowadays this is really where most of the world is focusing their efforts and their intelligence and their endeavors, in this concept of sense perception. So the scientists come along and say, well, we're going to be a little smarter than that. We know our senses are, we know we have imperfect senses. We'll make better telescopes. We'll make better microscopes. We'll make better hearing devices. We'll make ultrasounds so we can tell whether a lady is going to have a male or a female baby even before he's born. We have so many creative talents. We can make so many tools and machines. And we will use double cross-examination so that maybe your perception is wrong, but if I have my perception and we have enough people here, we can solve this illusion problem right here. So the scientists come up with this thing called empirical reasoning, and they say, we will logically pound out the truth, anumana. Philosophy is limited to what is knowable in this case. They're acknowledging, okay, we're willing to accept that. Sources of data for inference and hypothesis. So what the scientists are doing is they're using conclusions from others, paramattananumana, general first-class intelligence, going to the source for clear understanding. So we actually say this also in our Vedic studies. Srila Prabhupada says that if you want to know who your father is, you go to the mother. And in the same way, he extrapolates from that analogy. He says, if you want to know what real knowledge is, you have to go to the Vedas, because the Vedas are given to us by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in this way, the scientists agree a little bit, but instead of going to the Vedas, they go to each other. And so whatever Copernicus figured out 400 or 500 years ago about the shape of the universe, everybody said, oh yeah, that all seems to be true. And then Galileo comes along and he says, oh yeah, that seems to be true, and they're making telescopes, and they're saying, oh look, we can all figure this out. And then from there, they build up on it. And this is particularly true in the world of theoretical physics. It is becoming very, very deeply embedded, and they are all building on each other's so-called knowledge. So in that sense, you have to, when Einstein came up with his theories of E equals mc squared, eventually people accepted, oh, that's true. So now if you try to say something other than that, people get you're not following the parampara of science. So then here's the next aspect of empirical reasoning, is one's own conclusions, svarthanamana. Class intelligence, one who relies on their own feeble senses, even though unreliable due to their 4 inherent human defects. So again, I'm showing more. We've already seen 2. So here's the concept of being mistaken prone. Everybody knows, any honest person has to admit that they make mistakes. Yeah, you may have all the best intentions in the world. I think I was explaining last night how the most richest country in the world with the most powerful money concepts and scientists put up this thing called the Hubble telescope, and everybody was so excited about it, and when it finally was up there, it didn't work. So even though you may have so many resources, still the propensity to make mistakes will be there. And Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, there are 5 causes to every action: the person, the place, the senses, the endeavor, which we have control over those 4. But he says ultimately, super soul. Krishna wants to, and we see with the example of the Hubble telescope, they had control over the person, the place, the endeavor, and the senses. But Krishna decided, no, you're too proud. We're going to make it not work. So, this class intelligence, we're relying on our feeble senses, even though unreliable due to the 4 inherent defects. Sometimes this is what happens. They think they're so smart, but this is not going to work too well. So then the next one here is, this is first class intelligence. This is second class intelligence. And third class, and Prabhupada actually gives this example. The first class intelligence is somebody says you don't touch the fan. It will chop your finger. And an intelligent person goes, oh, okay, I won't touch the fan. And that's the end of it. The foolish person, or the more like the average person, goes, well, I want to find out. And so they stick their finger and chop. So that's the second class intelligence. The third class intelligence is the person who doesn't listen and doesn't learn, and he puts his finger and then he does it again, and he does it again, and he does it again. Of course, that's a silly example, but we have to think about how many times in our life we try something, it doesn't work, and then we think, well, maybe I'll try it again, and it still doesn't work. Usually this occurs like when we're dealing with other people and things. Sometimes we're trying to get somebody to do something, it's like, it's not working. So this is third class intelligence. Somebody says, no, that person is not going to cooperate. No, I'll get them to cooperate. No, they're not going to cooperate. And you spend so much time. So third class intelligence is disregarding, and you go through these problems. So comparison, apamana, comparing what has been defined beforehand with what is encountered. If I know what to look for, I can recognize gold, God, when present. So Prabhupada gives this example. He said, if you don't know what gold is, and you go into the marketplace, and the man brings out what's referred to in the world of geology, I think it is, they'll give you a piece of pyrite. And pyrite was very popular in California as fool's gold. It looks like gold. It's got the same glow. It's a very interesting piece of mineral, but it's pyrite. It has really no value. It's not meltable like gold is. It's not a metal, it's a mineral. So if you don't know the tests for gold, and I think there's 5 tests, you can bend it, you can burn it, you can melt it, you can put it in different chemicals and things like that, and it'll behave a certain way. If you don't know those qualities, then somebody will tell you, this is gold, and you'll buy pyrite. So Prabhupada used this example, and we see in the world today, particularly in the Western world, people are accepting all sorts of crazy ideas about what is God because they don't know. They just don't know what the qualities and what to look for in the nature of God. And so this is a very big problem. And so that's what I'm trying to share with here. Potential flaw. If taught incorrectly, you end up with pyrite, imposter gold, I'm using the analogy here, imposter God. I found a piece of gold, God, fool's gold, and dissatisfaction. You haven't found gold. You found some nonsense somebody gave you. So, okay, so we keep going down here, variations on inference and hypothesis. Inferring an unperceived event from a perceived event cause. Now, keep in mind, this is what the scientists are doing. They're doing all these experiments, and they're thinking by doing all these experiments, we can figure out what's true. And so the example is bread was just made nearby because I can smell it. And, you can see the reasoning. It's like, I smell some bread. I smell some bread, therefore there must be somebody baking bread somewhere. So you can, even though we haven't seen it, our nose is telling us something, and we can make it, this is called This is the deductive process where we're using empirical logic and reason to figure out, oh, there must be somebody cooking bread. Okay, so this is next one is inferring an unperceived cause from a perceived effect. So there is an oven nearby because I can smell fresh bread. Well, maybe there isn't an oven. Maybe they're cooking it on an open fire. There could be many different ways that bread is being cooked. To assume that it was made in an oven that you're familiar with might not be correct at all. But you could make that conclusion through your logic. And then here's another example. Inference based on uniformity of coexistence. There must be a bakery nearby because I smell fresh bread. The smell of fresh bread routinely coexists with an operational bakery, but maybe not. Maybe there's not a bakery next by. Maybe there's just somebody who has a big bread truck and you open it up and all the smell is coming in and there's no bakery. So you could draw the wrong conclusions. This is the point, is again, there is a big problem here if you're going to rely on empirical logic to understand anything. And so the last defect, the last form of human defects is this cheating propensity. And do not think that the scientists do not engage in cheating. They do. And probably one of the most embarrassing examples of that was in, I believe, the state of Arizona. It was about 10 or 15 years ago. There were some physicists, and this is maybe a little bit complicated, but the physicists, they're constantly looking for a way to do cold fusion. Because if they can do cold fusion, and I'm not a physicist, but my understanding is if they can figure out how to do cold fusion, they will have all the energy they could ever imagine that they'll ever need. You don't need fossil fuels like oil and gas. You don't need sun. You don't need, coal. Cold fusion is sort of the holy grail for the physicists. So these gentlemen in the University of Arizona in the laboratory claimed that they had conquered cold fusion. And for about a year and a half, the whole world of physicists, all the universities across America, and I think it eventually went to Australia, went all over the world, everybody's saying they figured out how to do cold fusion. And there was a whole big thing. Then after and of course, and what the scientists do, they publish in their journals that we have solved cold fusion, and they put out how to do it. And of course, all the other physicists and all the other laboratories across the country tried to start duplicating their efforts to confirm that they actually came up with this solution. And they weren't able to duplicate their efforts. And they're going, well, we're not getting it. So they were calling the state of Arizona and saying, well, how did you do this exactly? And these so-called scientists were very mischievous. They were giving vague answers. And the reason was because this university had become very popular. The newspapers were coming in. Money was being sent in. There was all of this attention they were getting. And I read a little bit about this. The university really didn't want the attention to go away. They liked all the attention. They liked all the money. And they were only able to sort of prop this thing up. I think it was only for almost a year, not a whole lot longer than that. And then eventually the outside scientific community just got so insistent on getting clear and straight answers that they had to finally admit that no, they never actually did figure out cold fusion. So why did that even happen to begin with? It's right here. Because of the cheating propensity. Scientists are people also. They have big egos. Some of them have very big egos. So if you expect that they're going to deal with their ego, of course some of them are honest, some of them are good people, but there's many that are just wanting to. Probably the biggest problem is with science nowadays is most of the science is funded by big industry. And if your laboratory is dependent on money coming from some big country, then you're going to do what that company wants you to do. And this is a really big problem, especially in the pharmaceutical industry. They will prove whatever they have to prove in order to get their funding. So the point I'm making is that scientists, you cannot rely on them. So the question then is if this is our situation where we have these four propensities and you can't avoid this problem, the soul, and you'll see here I'm kind of showing these little lines trying to get down, they're getting stuck. They're not actually able to penetrate into the heart of the soul. this is not going to provide the conditioned soul, which is in this, trapped in all of this activity over here. It's not going to provide the necessary information to break out of the material world. So what do we have? We have in our Vedic system, the program that Srila Prabhupada has so very kindly given and reminded the world. India had knowledge of this, but they seem to have sort of forgotten it. Or they're getting caught up in thinking that the Western scientific process is a good thing. But no, it has all sorts of problems. So this is what we teach in our Krishna Conscious program, is this concept of pramana, evidence. What is real evidence? Apta vakya shabda, fulfilling words heard. In other words, we gave the example earlier that if you want to know who your mother is, you ask your father. Excuse me, if you want to know who your father is, you ask your mother. So in this case, if you want to actually understand what's happening in the universe, you have to go to a reliable source. And that reliable source is the Vedic literatures. And we have what's referred to as Shruti, the core canonical literature, heard directly from the Supreme Lord. And this is the perfect first-class intelligence, just hearing from the spiritual master, hearing from the Vedic literatures, and accepting and understanding and adjusting your life to incorporate what's being taught there. So, traditionally, we have the Vedic literatures, the Rig Veda, the Samaveda, the Yajur Veda, the Artha Veda, and the Upanishads. And here we have some notes. Again, now keep in mind, many people in the Western world, they have no concept of the Vedas at all. Most of the Indian people have some sense of it. But the Rig Veda is sacred Vedic mantras and hymns. The Samaveda, melodious interpretations. Yajur is injunctions related to Vedic sacrifices. Artha Veda, spells, charms for health and prosperity. And the Upanishads are becoming more popular in the West, are little separate volumes of profound Vedic wisdom summarized in succinct Sanskrit poetry. They're very usually short couplets. So Smriti is remembered, histories by Acharyas supportive to the Shruti. So in this regard, we then have these 18 Vedic Puranas, and there are 6 in each of the different modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So we, of course, focus on the Bhagavad Purana, which I've illustrated here in the yellow. It gives the explanation of all of Krishna's 10 avatars, celebrated as the topmost Purana by the Bhakti movement. And we also have, I believe the devotee, either this morning or yesterday, was talking about the Garuda Purana. Padma Purana has some interesting information. So these are the Puranas in the mode of goodness, which are meant for people that are in the mode of goodness. They're the highest forms of knowledge. But Krishna is very kind, and he realizes not everybody's in the mode of goodness, so he gives other Puranas to teach them. So these are the ones that are for the people that are more in the mode of passion, in the Rajagun. The Brahmana Purana, I'm not going to go through the Markandeya Purana. And you can see here there's some description of what these are talking about, how to guide for worshiping and so forth. Now what's interesting here, and this has been an ongoing balancing act, we'll say, is that when you get into when you talk to the people that are teaching that Shiva is the Supreme Lord, they will reference the Shiva Purana. And in the Shiva Purana, it gives some kind of explanation that Shiva is the Supreme Lord. And that's why they make those arguments, because that's their scripture of choice. Now, whether or not they're just completely ignorant of the other aspects of what we're talking about here, or whether they just don't understand it, I don't know what would be the answer for that. But that's generally, they're not just whimsically saying Lord Shiva is the Supreme Lord. They're referring to the Shiva Purana. But if we study these literatures here, again, the Vedas have been provided in order to provide some method of upliftment for people in all 3 modes of nature. So this is actually a very kind thing that Krishna has arranged. So everybody has something to keep lifting them up. And if they pursue these processes with alacrity, then maybe eventually in their next life they will move to the mode of passion. It might take many lives, it might take 1 or 2. And then eventually they'll move to the mode of goodness. and eventually they'll come to the Krishna Balaram Mandir and take prasadam, and they'll actually understand what's going on. So this is the Vedic system. And then we have down here, just to be complete, we have the ihasas, ihoso, indeed as it was. So these are referred to as the historic references. Some people would technically say they're not Vedas, but we say we accept them as the Vedas. And in this case, we're talking to the Mahabart, which is 200,000 verses. And we know that's the historic epic of the Kauravas and the Pandavas' feud over the more vast than the Bible or works of Homer. That reference is for our friends in the West who are only familiar with the Bible or Homer, to give them some sense of this is not a small piece of literature. Of course, the Bhagavad Gita only has 700 verses, and it's actually brilliant. And if you actually study the Bhagavad Gita, you'll find that there's quite a few verses which are not exactly the same, but they pretty much say the same thing. So even maybe less than 700 verses, the same message is being given over and over and over again. And then, of course, there's a Ramayana, which is another big, huge scripture. And the Manu Samhita, which Prabhupada refers to a lot. We don't necessarily so much lean on the Manu Samhita. Much of what's in the Manu Samhita is very nice, but in Kali Yuga, things have degraded so much that being able to follow. I believe when Prabhupada was here and one of his disciples learned about the Manu Samhita, he went to Prabhupada and he made some comment. I want to do everything the way the Manu Samhita says it. I want to follow all the injunctions of Manu. Prabhupada just laughed at him. He said, you're a fool. You're never going to be able to do that. You just chant Hare Krishna and do your service and follow my instructions and everything will be fine. So, and if you want to get a sense of it, go read the Manu Samhita. There's some very strict things in there, and everything it's very, very deep, which in other millenniums was possible. People had a much more controlled mind. Okay, so now where are we going to go with this? So what we've learned so far is that there are three systems here of knowledge. There's the Vedic system, which we've gone over here. There's the scientific system right here, which is problematic, very problematic. And then there's what the average person on the street does, who aren't necessarily scientifically inclined. They'll show it to me and then I'll believe it. But how do we actually get this information? Because we know there's all sorts of people, and of course you folks from India here know there's all sorts of people that are talking all sorts of stuff, and they're basing it on the Vedic literatures. So just having the Vedic literatures is not enough. And in fact, Prabhupada gives the example that milk touched by the lips of a serpent has a poisonous effect. So even if somebody is actually reading the Bhagavad Gita and they're studying the Bhagavad Gita, if they're not getting that information through the proper parampara system, and believe me, there are some people in the Western world that are coming and you can usually pick it up pretty quick. They're presenting aspects of Bhagavad Gita. They may not be they're frequently not even quoting it properly. And one of the things they like to do is not put the references, and they don't put the word for word because they don't really want you to go back and study it that closely. Sometimes they have very malicious intentions, and even some people have translated the Bhagavad Gita, but they only translate the first 12 chapters. They don't translate all 18 chapters, and I believe the reason why they don't do that is because it's the last 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita that get into things that a lot of the people in the West just don't want to think about. You mean there is a divine and a demoniac nature, which is chapter 16? Or there's modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance? Oh, I thought everybody was one. I thought it was all good. I thought it was all wonderful. I thought we could Bhagavad Gita, we could just do whatever we want and praise God and everybody goes to heaven and that's all there is to it. No. We actually teach a philosophy that says you have to clean up your act. You have to learn what the difference is between goodness, passion, and ignorance. Otherwise, you'll continue to bring on all sorts of difficulties. So, how do we get the information? And that's where we go to this part of the chart, and we find that there are references to, there are 12 Mahajans. Mahajan, great personalities who have been authorized to actually teach Vedic sciences. Not that anybody can just put up a shingle and say, I'm going to declare myself an expert. You come to me and now I'll teach you. No. We've been told that Krishna has given us the advice that there are 12 authorized people. So here's the names of the people: Bali Maharaj, Yamaraj, Janaka, Manu, Kapila, Narada, and Prahlad. We've been reading about Prahlad in the morning program, Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhishma Dev, Sukadev. But the problem is that out of these 12, many of them have been lost. Those disciplic successions have been, for one reason or another, are no longer current. So, but here are the 4 that currently exist. We have the Shiva Rudra Sampradaya, we have the Lord Brahma, we have the 4 Kumaras, we have the Lakshmi Narayan. And they all teach slightly different flavors of the process of self-realization. The one that we are very fortunate to be part of is what we've always referred to as the Brahma, Lord Brahma, Madhva. We were hearing this morning in the Bhagavad Gita class, Madhvacharya's, I think it was his disappearance day today, is that right? It was his disappearance day. So this is the Acharya Madhva that we heard a little bit about. And he taught this concept of monism, which is dualism. There are 2. And you'll always see with Madhvacharya, he'll have his hand like this. Because many people in the West are teaching this, just one. Everything is one. I'll be probably talking, and I think I'm giving class tomorrow. I'll be talking about this concept tomorrow. People think everything is one. No. You can't, it doesn't work that way. You can't have any relationship if it's all one. So you'll see here, if you look at the picture, you'll see, again, you can always tell when you're looking at a picture of Madhvacharya. Because this was a very radical thing. He's got 2 fingers up. He's saying there's 2. There is the Jivatma. I've got it written here. There's the Jivatma and there's the Paramatma. And there is an eternal relationship that's going on there between Krishna in the form of Paramatma and our individual, unique manifestation of Krishna as the Jivatma. So this was a very revolutionary change. Remember, there is a progression from when Lord Buddha came and he threw out the Vedas and he said everything is void. Everything's nothing. So when they talk about nirvana, vana means forest in Sanskrit, nir means without. What they're actually saying is the end result, the end conclusion is everything is nothing. Nirvishesha is the Sanskrit word. Everything is nothingness. And so from there, Shankaracharya said, well, we kind of agree with that, but we want to bring it back to the Vedas. So he came up with his concept of Advaita and used the Vedas and distorted the Vedas to present that. And then we have Ramanujacharya, which is his disappearance day is tomorrow, I believe. And I think I'll probably talk about that a little bit tomorrow. And he started the first seed of, no, Shankaracharya, you don't have it right. That's not correct. But then Madhva came along, was very strong, and he said, no, it's 2. Ramanujacharya started that process. He said, well, it's one with qualities. But Madhvacharya nailed it even further. He said, no, it's even more than that. Okay, so we have here this concept of the Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya is a reference to Lord Chaitanya. So this is our Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya Sampradaya. And then we also have a very wonderful thing which every devotee should be well versed in, understand this concept. Because when you want to know what is true, how do you know ultimately what is true? And so we have what's referred to as the concept of the Guru, Shastra, Sadhu, Trinity. Although I don't like that word Trinity, but that's what it is. You have these 3 reference points. And from these 3 reference points, we have a history of what the great sages have said over the years, many millenniums. And then we have the individual personal guru who's coming and he's giving us this information in the language and the context which is understandable as society changes and as time morphs and as things change. The wording and the explanations and the parables from hundreds of years ago may be hard for us to grasp. Our society has changed. This is one of the problems with the biblical teachings. You read the Bible, there's all these examples. You have to have a whole history of what happened 2,000 years ago when Jesus gave all these examples. And it's very problematic. So our system is, no, the guru, he's living, he's representing now what's happening in the world today. And then, of course, you have the Shastra, and I'm illustrating here. The Shastra, of course, for us, as I've already shown over here on the top corner, is the Vedic literatures. So with the Guru, Shastra, Sadhu system, if all three of these points and references are in fact saying the same thing, which in our tradition is that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we have an eternal relationship with him, our happiness and our whole constitutional way of life is much more satisfying, and it works much better if we simply understand our position in that respect. Then we know there's probably some substance to that, because all three of these, the scripture is saying that, the guru is saying that, the sadhus are saying that. Now it must be correct. And sometimes I give the analogy in the American government, which sometimes doesn't work so well, but it's based on the same system. They have the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branch. The executive is the president, legislation, and the judicial is the courts, and the legislation is the House of Representatives and the Senate. And it's another example of this thing. They all have to agree before a law gets passed. So it has its advantages and disadvantages, but it's just an illustration to show where there's some similarity here. So anyhow, we've got this explained a little bit underneath here. I'll just quickly look at this. Oh, so here's the verse. Sadhu Shastra Guru Vakya Chitti Karita Aikya. Excuse my Bengali, that may not be completely pronounced right, but so here, the scripture named Srimad Bhagavatam is the literary incarnation of God, and it is compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, the incarnation of God. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people, and it is successful, all blissful, and all perfect. And there's a reference from the Bhagavatam. And then we have a nice quote here supporting Lord Chaitanya from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, to deliver all the materially contaminated people of the world. That same Krishna has descended in the moving form of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then over here, saintly persons, sadhus, think of Krishna 24 hours a day. They have no other interests. Why do people neglect such exalted personalities and associate with proud materialists? Again, from the Bhagavatam. So if we look at this, three Vedic checks and balances for establishing truth, you'll see here there's a green line, and there's a red line, and there's a yellow line, and you'll follow these lines, and you will see the lines bond together to make this very powerful rope, and it pops up here, where now the soul actually has some reliable information to get out of this very difficult situation we know as samsara. He's able to break this cycle because he has this information. And as that cycle breaks, he then has the opportunity, because just because the information is there doesn't mean that everybody will take advantage of it, which we see that all the time. So if he fails to take this information, then when the cycle of samsara goes around again, and the soul is born into another body, and I'm showing it as a human form of life, but it may not be a human form of life. But let's say that he's fortunate enough where he gets a human form of life. Then he gets cast back into the material world, which is what we see over here. Those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets. And those in the abominable mode of ignorance go down to the hellish worlds. So if we look over here, there's a lot of stuff going on. You'll see here there's the lower, middle, and upper planetary systems, the Swarloka. These are the planets of the demigods and so forth. And I put some references here. This is the head and the mouth of the Supreme Lord. And I've got the different planets here: Swarloka, Tapaloka, Gyanaloka, Maharloka. And so, and these are the kind of personalities that live there: the Brahmanas, the Sannyasis, Vanaprasthas, celibate Brahmacharis, Kshatriyas. These are the places that they'll go if they've lived their lives according to their dharma, their duty properly, but maybe hadn't taken advantage of the Vedic literatures that say Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and you have a relationship with him. So you can live a Vedic lifestyle, you can follow your dharma, and not necessarily pack up the process of bhakti-yoga. So, and you can be very much in the mode of goodness. And so the Gita tells us that those who worship the demigods will go to the planets of the demigods. And if you worship ghosts and spirits, you'll go down here where the ghosts and spirits are, down here. For most of us are in the, all of us here in this room today, are in the Bur Bhuva Lokas, middle planetary systems, which I believe it's right here in the middle, which is the earthly planetary systems. So when we talk about the three worlds, I believe this is what they're referring to, the upper, the middle, and the lower planetary systems. And then some people may not, I know I was very confused for a long time about lower planetary systems, but there's actually even lower than the lower, which is referred to as the hellish worlds. And here's the names of all those hellish planetary systems, which are described in length in the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And these are just the names of those. I'm trying to show here, and I'm using illustrations based on the way the Bhagavatam explains it, of some of the things that are going on down there. And similarly, I'm trying to show up here what's going on in the higher planetary systems. So that's what happens if a person fails to take advantage of this Guru Shastra Sadhu system. But let's try to be a little more positive here. Let me just see where it says here. Otherwise, a person who acts whimsically falls down due to false prestige. Thus he becomes involved in the laws of nature, which are composed of the 3 qualities, goodness, passion, and ignorance. In this way, a living entity becomes devoid of his real intelligence and becomes perpetually lost in the cycle of birth and death. Thus he goes up and down from a microbe in stool to the highest position in the Brahmaloka planet. That's the 4th canto. And they're referring to this whole thing right here. Up and down, human lives, animal lives, demigod lives. You get caught up in here, which is, and this cycle, maybe for an insect, it might only be birth, death, disease, old age, all happens within a day or two. For a small insect, if you live in California in the form of a redwood tree, this cycle could take 1,000 years before you find, from the seed to when the tree finally falls over. There's trees in the redwood forests in California that are even some are 12 or 1,500 years old. And we know the demigods are living even much, much longer than that. But still, this cycle is happening. So if you want to get off of this cycle, take advantage of what's being given here by our Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. And what is the result or the destination? So Krishna says, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. And let's see what we got here. Yeah, here's a nice reference to the soul. Actually, this reference along the side here is describing super soul. This is right out of the Bhagavad Gita. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, who is the provider, who exists as the overseer and the permitter, and who is known as the super soul, and that's right here. So Krishna is there within your heart, and he's saying, hey, Prabhu, hey, look, let's get with the program. And the program is right here. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. And here are the 5 primary rasas that one can engage in eternally in the spiritual world. Madhurya ras, conjugal, juvenile love, highest love where the Supreme Lord fully agrees to be under the control of the devotee, mood of Srimati Radharani, and the conclusion of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the highest stage. But there are other stages. Everybody has their own unique relationship. Vatsalya ras, parental attitude. Devotee considers himself the Lord's provider, like a parent to a child. So mode of mother, Maharaj Nanda and Yasoda, that relationship is very dear. Sakya ras, friendship, fraternal relationship with God, and friendly affection develops. Sometimes serving Krishna by mock fighting, affectionate illusion of equality. Krishna likes that. He likes that people sometimes forget, so he can enjoy that relationship with them on that level. Mood like friends, like Baladev and Sudama. And then there are, above all, attain Glokadam, Krishna's abode above Vaikuntha. There's Dasya Ras and Santa Ras. Dasya Ras is servitor. God's opulence is revealed. One serves him with awe and veneration. Mood of intimate servants like Chitraka, Patrika, and Raktaka go to Vaikuntha, the spiritual material abode of Sri Narayan. And then Santa Ras, which is neutrality. One worships impersonal Brahman. They don't necessarily have a very deep understanding of Krishna, but they're recognizing something is there. Localized aspect of God is Paramatma. Destiny is Jnani, mood of Krishna's cows, stick, flute, or garland. No relationship develops with the impersonal understanding of God. So there's some references there. Attain the region of Brahma Paramatma, the seat of eternal peace. So just to complete the chart, I've tried to draw these things here, and I've illustrated the different relationships, with this one being, of course, the highest. There's the Vatsalya Ras, parental. This is the Sakya Ras as friendship. And then there's Hanuman, is the perfection of servitorship. And then I tried to show here this Brahma Jyoti is sort of this Santa Ras. Sri Gokula Dham, also known as Vraja, Gokula, Svetadreep, and Vrindavan, is the topmost realm in the spiritual world. And I've got a little illustration. So if we follow this line down, it actually goes to here where Krishna is, and the soul is then adequately informed and adequately trained and develops his relationship and is able to escape this terrible, terrible situation that we're all constantly wrestling with. And that is pretty much the whirlwind tour of what I refer to as the knowledge acquiring process and the conditioning of the soul. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to address them. Maybe.
I'm sorry, I might have missed. Did you have Vaikuntha?
What's that?
Did you have the realm of Vaikuntha? Vaikuntha?
Yeah, that would be up here. That was what we just talked about.
Okay,
right?
so if you have more of a neutral or a neutral relationship or servitude or no, not
my understanding is. Oh, go ahead.
Just the fourth and fifth, yeah, neutral.
I think you're down here.
Yeah. Okay, more neutral. If you have. Okay, there you go. Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that. Yeah, so you go to Vaikuntha, more in the servitude or neutral stage, perhaps. Servitude or neutral?
So Santa Ras is for people who have some, I mean, you know, the sages write volumes of literature about all this sort of thing.
Sure.
And this is a very condensed analysis, just to kind of point us in the right direction. But Santa Ras is referred to, in other words, and some of these things are a little hard. Again, we gave the analogy last night. We're always trying to bring things down and to fit our little limited brain-like capacity. But we learn that the garland that goes around Krishna's neck, even though we just, you know, I should speak for myself, I think of it as just a garland. But no, it's not just a garland. It's an extraordinary garland because it's around Krishna's neck. Okay, the sand that Krishna is walking on is not just sand. That's extraordinary sand because Krishna is walking on it. So everything in the spiritual world, anything that has anything to do with Krishna is extraordinary, even though my mundane brain goes, oh, it's just a tree. No, it's not just a tree. It's a very extraordinary tree. But because they're in that form, that's obviously different than the form of the, up here at the Sankhya Ras, the friendship. When we read these stories in the Krishna book of Krishna's frolicking with his boyhood friends and playing leapfrog and getting in all these adventures and Krishna's saving them all the time, Well, that's a much higher level of consciousness. It's a much more meaningful relationship. So what we're seeing here is there's a whole spectrum of relationships that one can have in their relationship with the Supreme Lord. And he's perfectly willing to have any one of those relationships. And the reason why I find this particularly extraordinary is because, generally speaking, in the Western world, which I was brought up in, a lot of the so-called religious people, they think of God in one mood. He's the Father and we're his kids. And God gives us everything, and that's it, you know, and do what God says and be a good boy. You know, and I guess there's something in there, but Prabhupada made the point that, you see, in the Vedic tradition, it's flipped over. Mother Yasoda and Nanda Maharaj, Krishna is their child. And Prabhupada makes the point that when Krishna is your child, you have to serve him. Whereas in the Western concept, if God's the Father, he's serving you. The Father serves the children. So what's really beautiful about this is that we see that Krishna is having all sorts of very, very deep relationships with people on all different kinds of levels, right?
Thank you. One more question.
Sure.
Let's see. As far as the individual soul goes, the jiva atma,
Jivatma.
and then accompanying that individual soul inside the heart is paramatma,
Correct.
or the super soul.
Correct.
So, and all living entities have this super soul.
Mm-hmm.
So does that
Every
mean
atom. That's what makes the atom spin. Krishna's there. It's a little different, but that's
Krishna's the Paramatma is even inside every atom in the universe,
Yes.
and even the spaces
yes.
between. And are these Paramatmas, say the Paramatma that's inside me, is it exactly the same energy as the Paramatma, say, that's inside you, or the Paramatma that's inside of a cow, or the Paramatma that's inside of a tree? Are they're all the same Paramatma?
Yes. Yes. A nice way to think of this and understand it is, Prabhupada gives the example that you know what's happening inside of your body right now. And I certainly know what's happening inside of my body, and it's a little sick, which is why I've been coughing, and I apologize for that. But sometimes it's just, I can't. And everybody in this room, some people might be having a sore leg, or somebody might be having an open wound or whatever. They know what's happening inside of their individual body, but they don't even know what's happening in the person who's right next to them. But Krishna, as Paramatma, understands what's happening inside of everybody at the same time. And he's relating to them in that regard. And that's what makes it special.
Okay, very nice. So the eternal witness.
The eternal witness, yeah. Yeah.
It's one way I think about it, maybe it's almost, in America it's come out where, say our cell phones and so many things, they're collecting data on us. So it's almost, the way I was thinking about this, it's almost like, what is it, NSA or whatever, the spying agencies or whatever, they're collecting all this data from everybody's individual cell phones.
Right.
And it's all going into this huge database. Is that almost like an analogy you could use with Paramatma?
I'd be a little bit...
witnessing, or it's kind of like collecting data, observing, and knows everything. Paramatma knows everything that's going on with every individual,
right.
is what I'm getting at.
Right.
In the same way, maybe these spy agencies would like to know what's going on with every single individual.
Yes, and yes, with some exceptions, okay? The reason why I'm a little reluctant to just give a flat-out yes is because the analogy you're using tends to have sort of a punitive nature to it. And also the concept is, because, one of the things in the West, and this is actually an argument that's given many times by the atheistic community, and they say it very mockingly. They go, they have a little bit, You mean God's in heaven and he's writing notes on you and you and you and, oh, I'm going to read those notes and I'm going to... Krishna's having a blast in the spiritual world. He's acting as super soul within our heart. He's got other people keeping all the dirty notes on things, okay? The concept of Yamaraj and I don't want to get too particular here because I can't say I'm a complete authority on how everything works, but I don't want to give the impression that it's punitive in the sense that, like we have that saying, you know, that Christmas song, you know, you better watch out, you better not cry, you better not shout because Santa Claus is coming. You know, you better, he knows if you're naughty, he knows if you are nice, you know. Yeah. There is an element of that, but I really don't like the analogy because it kind of drags it down to, you better do your duty, you know. And Krishna is ultimately the most renounced. And his attitude is, you want to go do some nonsense, go right ahead and do it. We're having a great time here in the spiritual world. You're welcome to join us. Just put on the right clothes and get with the program and join us. And if you don't want to, okay, go do what you're doing. You're not going to disturb us. You know, so Krishna's, you know, he has those 6 qualities. One is that he's the ultimate renounced. You're not doing it for him. Well, actually, in a sense, you are, because he, you know, just like a father, he sees our suffering. The Christian tradition has the story of the prodigal son. He says, I don't need your advice anymore, Dad. I'm going to conquer the world on my own. And he takes his inheritance, and he goes off in the world. And the father's saying, no, you're way too young. You don't realize the world is a very dangerous place. Don't do this. But the kid is very proud. He says, I'm going to go do it. And he goes off and he wastes all his money and ends up eating out of a pig trough because he doesn't got any money. Nobody's helping him. And he's embarrassed to go home. My father will think I'm a fool. I've taken advantage. I've wasted all this money. I gave him my inheritance. How can I go home? But, you know, he finally has to eat humble pie, as we say, and he goes home, and he's shocked to find that his father is so happy to see him again. Thank you, my son has finally come home. So we're a little like that. This is a Christian tradition, Christian analogy, but it works for us too. Krishna is there, and he's saying, you've chosen to go to the material world. You've chosen to forget this. Everything is so wonderful. Why are you wasting your time in this material world where there's this cycle of birth, death, disease, and old age? I mean, that's our reality right there, and I started the lecture by pointing out. And believe me, I have dealt with people in the West where I've tried to point this out, birth, death, disease, and old age. And these 4 things along the side here, that you as a human being are mistaken prone, you have the propensity to cheat, you have imperfect senses, and you have you fall into illusions. And I've actually had people say, I know I don't make any mistakes because I don't exist. That's how crazy some people are getting. They're not even close to understanding this philosophy or even any aspect of it. And they're so disturbed when you try to point this out to them, they become so proud. And it completely takes the foundation out of the way they see the whole world, and they don't know where to go with it. Of course, that's because they're proud. If they're actually humbled. I know, true testimony, the reason why I became a devotee is because I heard this thing about the 4 imperfections. And I was in college at the time, young boy, and I thought I was so smart. And I couldn't go to sleep. And I'd say, well, what about this? No, that's a propensity to make mistakes. Well, what about this? And I'd go over it every night. I'd go over it and I'd say, wait a minute. You can't get around these things. If you're an honest person, you have to admit you have a tendency to make mistakes. You have a tendency to cheat. You have a tendency to fall into illusions, and you have imperfect senses. So how can you figure anything out? You can't figure anything out. So that leaves us with 1 or 2 possible alternatives. Either the whole world and our entire life, we will be destined to be living in total ignorance, never knowing anything for sure. Or there has to be some alternative, which, by the way, flies in the face of what's being taught, particularly in the Western world, although I think it's coming to India as well, is this concept of you can figure it out for yourself. You don't need a guru. You don't need anybody else to tell you what to do. You just meditate, and you will be taught from within. Okay?
Thank you. Maybe one more, just quick.
All right.
You had a verse on there, the verse that explains that by pure love of Krishna, Krishna can be controlled.
Mm-hmm. That was down at the bottom over here. That's the only way. It's the only way. I believe it was down here. No, Krishna reserves the right to not be understood through any mechanical method. Let me see if it's down here. Or the whole list of them down here. Okay. Let's see if I can find it.
Yeah,
my dear Uddhava, that unalloyed devotional service rendered to me by my devotees brings me under their control. It's just like any other relationship we have with other people. If we know someone has a deep affection for us, we'll jump off a cliff for them. You know, we'll do whatever it takes. If somebody really, we know they have a deep affection for us, we're very willing to go a long way to reciprocate. Whereas if a person is very rude or just ignores us or anything, yeah, fine, I ignore you too. So that, you know, we don't really have much of an understanding of real love in this world. It's very rare. Prabhupada said the most closest example to love in this world is the love a mother has for a child. And we see sometimes mothers will do extraordinary things. Even we see sometimes running around here the monkeys, you know, if there's a baby monkey, that mother, grab that monkey. It's there in every species. That's a natural propensity of the way the world is set up, that mothers are very protective because it's a dog-eat-dog world. And when you're a little tiny child or an animal, a monkey or whatever it is, even the little trees that we plant, particularly here in Vrindavan and anywhere in India, they always plant this chain link fence around it because otherwise the cow's just going to come and eat that tree down and nothing before it even gets a branch. So because of the affection, Krishna's heart melts for the devotee. And of course the extreme example of that is his affection for Radha. And he was so mystified by it, he decided to manifest himself in the form of Lord Chaitanya, because he couldn't even understand that, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, because Krishna understands everything. But he wanted to have that experience. The Radha's affection is so deep. He wanted to experience that, so he came as Lord Chaitanya. Otherwise, how can God be controlled by anybody? Not possible.
Only by that. God can feel like a sense of pure, if you're chanting or maybe you're singing a song of devotion, if God can feel that sense of devotion, then he'll reciprocate.
Absolutely.
That way.
It's all based on the bhakti. It's all based, you know, they what is that famous song? All you need is love. I like to say all you need is bhakti, because love is very misunderstood. All you need is bhakti. It's true. But who has it? And where will you get it from? And how can you cultivate it? Did you want to add something? Wait till the microphone.
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to mention about the example of Mother Yashoda in month of Kartik. It's a great example about how Krishna, you know, allowed her to bind him, control him.
The Damodar prayers. The devotees worship in the month of November, I think it is, when we have the celebration of Damodar. I don't know how familiar you are, where the story of, you know, Krishna's being a little bit naughty, and he's breaking the yogurt pots, and he's feeding it to the monkeys, and they've all got yogurt all over their face, and the other ladies in the village are getting upset because, you know, he's disrupting their kitchen activities. And they're chastising Mother Yashoda. Your boy, he's a very bad boy. You've got to do something about it. So here's Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Fear personified is frightened of him, and she's going after him with a rope to tie him up, which is apparently what nowadays they'd call it child abuse, but back then it was considered appropriate. If your child is being problematic, you tie him aside so he can't keep causing nonsense. And the whole story is that the rope was too short, and he kept it. And it was only when he realized his mother was getting so distraught, and what is wrong? She thought she was losing her mind. And he said, oh, my mother loves me so much, she wants to discipline me, and I'm causing her so much trouble. He said, okay, let her tie me up. I mean, if you really think about that pastime, it's just extraordinary. And that story is there, again, to remind us of the incredibly deep affection that Krishna can have for his devotee. And that's the only real relationship he's interested in. He has no interest in any of these other things. When we offer him things on the altar, or when we offer our food and stuff, you know, it's for our benefit to learn that service attitude. You know, it's not that he needs any of these things. He doesn't need anything. But it's an opportunity for us to learn what our relationship is with him and how to actually engage in it in a proper and a healthy way. Because the material world, for the most part, tends to be, like they say in the West, it's all about me. You know, the advertising, everything is it's all about you. Don't forget everybody else. Who cares about them? It's all about you. And in our tradition, it's just the upside down. It's opposite. It's not about me. It's about Krishna. Anybody else have any other questions they want to ask?
In that right side, you explained 4 sampradayas there, where Achintya Veda Ved is there.
What do you want to see?
That Ballavacharya and those, that slide is there.
I can't quite hear what he's saying.
Right side.
That?
No, left side. Where that 4 sampradayas there.
Oh, the 4 sampradayas.
Yes. So here, this 4 sampradaya is bona fide. So why is there basic differences there? These 4 are bona fide, correct? So why is the difference between this among 4? Like one is Dvaitavad, another one is Dvaitadvait.
Okay. These 4 sampradayas, I actually have a whole nother chart on that. If you want, you can come look at it when we're done. But if you look at this, I think I added it here. Okay. So these actually are in our lineage. I believe if you look at the Parampara for our Krishna Conscious program, you'll see all these names in there. Ramanuja came immediately after Sankaracharya. Madhvacharya came immediately after well, not immediately, but in the sense that they came historically afterwards. Madhvacharya came. Eventually, we get to Vallabhacharya and Nimbarkacharya. And if you look here, you'll see this one, well, let's start here, Ramanuja. Specific monism, one with attributes. So Shankaracharya said it's all one. No attributes, nothing. It's all one blob of energy. The Brahman, that's it. And then Ramanujacharya came along and he said, no, it's not quite like that. Madhvacharya came along and even pushed it a little further and he said, no, it's not just a little bit different. He made a very distinct definition. He said, it's 2, the Jivatma and the Paramatma. And we have an eternal relationship. And then let me see if I can figure the rest of these out. I'm not sure what the order is here, but in this case, and you see here, these are the terms, these are Sanskrit terms, Dvaita, Dvaita, Advaita, simultaneously duality and non-duality. Okay, yeah, so this one came next over here, Vallabhacharya. Purified non-dualism, individuals are Brahman. So each one of these acharyas fine-tuned it a little bit more. And if you want to go deeply into it, you can come up and look later. I have some definitions of it. I don't know it off the top of my head. But each one of them is moving. But I can tell you this, for Nimbarkacharya, if I were to just ask the people in the audience right now, if you see here, it's simultaneously duality and non-duality. Well, isn't that exactly what Lord Chaitanya taught when he said achintya beta beta tattva, right? In fact, abeta, dvaita, advaita, duality and non-duality is very similar to what Lord Chaitanya said, right? It's simultaneously one and different. And in my studies on this subject, and I've had some other devotees concur with this, that the unique thing that Lord Chaitanya added down here, this is achintya abeta tattva, okay? Achintya abeta beta atattva, is this word achintya. Because when Nimbarkacharya was teaching duality and non-duality, again, because our brains are so plugged into thinking in terms of this world and this dimension, that you can't have simultaneously your hand up and your hand down at the same time, right? You can only either have your hand up or your hand down. You can't have it in both places at once. So Nimbarkacharya is coming along and saying it's dual and it's non-dual. And the brain goes, what, my brain goes, well, which way is it? Because I don't like that ambiguity. But Lord Chaitanya added this element, which is extraordinary, and he clarified it, and he said, it's achintya. It's beyond the ability for your brain to fully comprehend. And then I go, oh, okay, I can deal with that. Without that, I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? I can't see both of them at the same time. And he's saying, you can't. That's right, you can't understand it. It is beyond your mundane ability to fully comprehend. But that is actually what the ultimate reality is, that Krishna is both one with everything, and yet at the same time he's completely independently not involved. And the Gita says something like that, I am within everything, but everything is not within me. Well, wait a minute, that sounds like a contradiction. No, it's not. It's this concept that Krishna has his own personality, and even though he's in every atom, as we were talking about earlier in Paramatma, still he doesn't lose his personality. Normally, if you take a book like this and you tear it up and throw it all over the floor, you don't have the book. You have a bunch of junk on the floor. But Krishna is saying, no, I can be all over the floor in all these millions of pieces, and I can still be here as the book. So these different acharyas evolved. Sankaracharya appeared a long time ago, 600, I think, after Christ, year 600, somewhere in there. And since then, our Vaishnava philosophy has evolved to where Lord Chaitanya came, and now he pinned it down.
Someplace Prabhupada tells like this, Ramanujacharya came from, like Lakshmi Mata is there, then Ramanujacharya, like in that parampara, and Madhvacharya Brahma, then like that parampara, and Nimbarkacharya is Chatuskumar, and then down the line. Similarly, Vallabhacharya, Lord Shiva, and down the line. So, like, correct, that only.
Is that what you wanted to see?
So is this they are coming after Sankaracharya after some time, that's why their philosophy is little bit changing, or it's from source only, like from Lord Shiva, from that source only they are giving this philosophy, Suddha Advaitvad, and from Lord Brahma, that Dvaitvad?
I'm not sure if I'm hearing everything you're saying, but if I did, as Vaishnavas in the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, at least my understanding, Prabhupada said we should be respectful of all of these traditions, because our tradition has come to where it is based on the building blocks of these other great personalities. So the fact that they may be still pursuing that particular tradition the way their acharya taught it, I don't think there's so much harm. I don't think there's any conflict there. I'm feeling very thankful that somehow or another I'm in the sampradaya that I'm in, and I think that's the mood of most of us here. We have the advantage of looking from a perspective of history through all of these things. But still, we respect all these traditions, because if it wasn't there, we wouldn't be where we are today. Like building blocks, you're building a ladder or something, each rung is building on the one before it. It's our spiritual science. Anybody else? Are we done tonight? One more? The man in the front. Okay.
Thank you. In the Asincha Abheda Tattva philosophy, God's energy is inconceivably one and also separate. Does the oneness come from the Paramatma?
Okay. What I think we're talking about here is Paramatma is there. Krishna is expanding himself in the form of Paramatma within the heart of every atom. And I'll go back to the analogy of the book. So if we think of that in terms of mundane logic, if Krishna has diversified himself into the heart of every atom, then again, if we were to take this book and I were to tear up pieces of it, given to everyone and everybody in the audience, we'd all have a piece of this book, but the book itself would no longer exist. So Krishna's, or Lord Chaitanya is clarifying that even though Krishna is in the heart of every atom, he's still completely whole as his own individual unique personality, and he can expand into other billions of universes like we looked at last night and still maintain his own unique personality. It's a concept that's really beyond our brain's ability to grasp, because there's nothing in this world that we can even come close to making the analogy with.
Okay,
right?
So he's one, but he's also separate. He's separate also in the sense of his expansions.
He's separate in the sense that he has his own ongoing pastimes and personality and activities. Like you go home at the end of the night and you have different activities.
Yeah.
But in your case, you're either at home having activities with your wife or your children or your neighbors or whatever, but then you can't be in this room having activities with us. You're there doing that. But Krishna could be in his room and having activities with the gopis. In fact, the Ras Leela is a real good example of every individual gopi thought that she alone was dancing with Krishna. And I'll take it even one step further. Everybody in this room every day is having some personal relationship with Krishna in our heart. I don't know what your relationship is, but I know what my relationship is. I know what my dharma is. I know what my history is. I know what my service is. I don't know you that well. I don't know what yours is. But it's very special to me, and I feel like Krishna's mine. But I recognize that everyone in this room has that same feeling. Krishna's yours also. Just like the gopis thought, Krishna's theirs. And that's what makes the philosophy work, because it's a very deep personal thing. And he will accept each one of us on whatever level we want to present ourselves at. If you want to present yourself as a very serious and committed, dedicated devotee, Krishna, oh, very nice. I'll have a very serious, dedicated relationship with you. He says, all of them as I surrender unto me, I will reward them accordingly. You want to get serious? He'll get serious. And if you want to just kind of part-time, we see in the West a lot of people, they're religious on Sunday and then they go do other things. And you say, okay, I'll have that relationship with you on Sunday and then I'll go do other things. And it's not meant in a retaliatory or punitive way. It's just, I'll match you. Actually, maybe that's even a little misleading, because we say that you take one step towards Krishna, he'll take 10 steps towards you. Because in a way, he is more sensitive to our own foolishness than we are. He said, why are you beating yourself? Again, the prodigal son. Why are you beating yourself up with this whole situation we've shown a couple times now? This whole, why are you settling for this right here? Why are you settling for this? You don't need to settle for this. There's something better than this cycle of birth, death, disease, old age. Get out of this cycle. It's time to put it aside. Prabhupada said, just one life. Get serious. Get out of this trap. It's an endless trap. Samsara. It's an endless trap. We sing every morning. Samsara dava dhanalita loka. Right? This material world is a forest fire of just problems. So get out of it. Get serious. Okay?
You hear people talk about this, this conditioning that you've outlined. I hear people talk about it like the Matrix, you know, kind of like that movie. You know, we're caught in the Matrix. And what I like about this philosophy is it gives you a way out.
Yes.
You see, you have a way out of the Matrix. You don't have to constantly just go through the
Keep getting
cycle
trapped.
of birth, age, disease, and death.
And that is the uniqueness of our philosophy. And the thing that's really beautiful about it is that we have beautiful deities, we have beautiful songs, we have beautiful prasadam, we have beautiful, wonderful festivals. The non-dualists, which I'm somewhat of a semi-expert in because I deal with it in my town in Ojai, California, where there's a whole city full of people like this, they don't have any of these things. They just sit and meditate and think about how godly they are and how they're transcending everything, and they're just dreaming. And the Bhagavad Gita says dreaming is a sign of ignorance. You know, illusions, madness. And Prabhupada said, if you see this problem, this birth, death, disease, and old age, and I've actually had people say, oh, I just don't let it bother me. They'll say, when you point out to them, you can see you were born.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get sick. Old age is coming. And I don't know anybody who's beat death yet. Krishna said, death I am, or time I am. I've come to dissolve all things, right?
Yeah.
And he said, and later in the Gita, it says, you know, you don't want to surrender on your terms? You're going to surrender on my terms in the form of death. So when you point this out to people, sometimes they'll say, I don't want to think about it.
You can also say in that same way, you know, with the diagrams of, you know, the embryo to a young child to an older person, if you kind of meditate, like if you just take a moment and you go back, say, and you think of maybe the earliest experience you had as a child, you know, maybe a young adolescent, a young man, and what have you, and you kind of meditate on that, if there's a feeling that you were the same person, in a way, could you say that's like your jiva?
Yeah, that's one of the proofs of the jivatma, that even though the body is changing, and the scientists have actually made some proof of this, they say that every cell in your body changes within a 7-year cycle. So what your brain cells, your muscle cells, I mean, obviously, Prabhupada says, you know, we were born at a time in the world where we all had, our parents took photographs of us when we were young kids. And you say, where is that young kid body? It's not there. You know, you have an old body now, and you'll have an older body in 20 years from now, too. Your body is changing, but you, within the body, are aware of that changing. And we hear, now that I'm getting older, I've heard, we've all heard this sort of thing, that he has an old man's body, but he has a young man's spirit. Yeah. And you want to do things, but your body's not going to let you do it, because guess what? You don't have that young body anymore.
My grandmother used to say that when she was, you know, old,
right.
And before she got too senile. She was, you know, say she was in her late 70s or something, and she'd say, oh, I still feel like I'm a little girl, or I still feel like I'm 18, you know. So maybe that's also might be a way that the soul is eternal, that there's eternal youthfulness in the soul.
That's right. That the verse in the Gita specifically says that as a soul changes from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly changes into another body upon death. And then, poof, you get started up again. Hopefully the next time you won't come into a material body, you'll have your spiritual body. So I think we're a little over our time here. Thank you all very much for your attention. It's been wonderful, and I'll see you all tomorrow morning if you come to the Bhagavatam class. I think it starts about, what, 8:15? 8 o'clock, okay. No, in the temple room. It's the main, I'm going to be giving